By torchlight and rumor, a courtroom assembled where belief outweighed proof. Oaths were rehearsed, testimonies trimmed to fit a verdict written in advance. The gavel moved, not to test truth, but to keep fear in rhythm. From village councils to marble halls, accusations multiplied by echo, silence was read as confession, and doubt filed under treason. We opened the docket of trials without evidence, sermons that became warrants, pamphlets that coached memory, manuals of shame that promised reform and delivered obedience. Follow the handwriting in the margins, the crossed-out lines, the clerk's uneasy corrections. Watch one rumor harden into law and then fracture, leaving a stain no sentence can erase. Who profits when certainty replaces proof? And what must a society forget to make that exchange? If this forbidden past grips you, subscribe and stay with us. Before we call the first witness, mark your starting point. Tell us your city divided by country, your local time, where you're watching from, and what you're doing then. Type ready, or drop us so we know you're taking your seat in the gallery. A bell rings. Not a warning, a summons. The note hangs in the nave and settles on stone like dust. Doors crack open. Shoes find the aisle. A bench creaks. The town learns where to look. On the chancel step sits a book, vellum, ribbon, a small crucifix beside it, a candle with a wick trimmed too clean. The clerk stands at a tilted table. He tests his quill on the margin and blows. He has copied these lines before. He will copy them again. A man steps forward, hat in hand, eyes on the floor. No witness beside him, no neighbor called, only his name, spoken in a steady voice by the beetle. It lands like a nail tapped twice. The formula is simple. One hand on the missal, one eye on the cross. Repeat after me. He does. The words come slow, phrases built to hold weight. To speak the truth, to keep the peace, to submit to judgment. They fit in the mouth like keys. No one testifies, no one swears they saw. The room still expects a verdict. When belief sits on the bench, absence is a kind of presence. Silence enters the record. The notary writes the hour. He writes the weather. He writes, appeared. Then he writes the charge in a hand that looks calm in any century. Defamation, heresy, broken oath, failure to obey a summons, words that fit under any roof. The judge nods. He wears no crown. He does not raise his voice. He asks the questions that live in every handbook. Name, parish, whether you understand, whether you are willing. He is patient. He is also a clock. The accused answers, I do, I am. I do not understand what has been said of me. He turns once, as if a witness might have walked in late. No one does. Outside, carts wait in a lane. A goat tests the rope, tied to a post. A child runs his finger along old wax that hung on old notices on this same door. Inside, time changes temperature. The room begins to feel like a schedule. The clerk reads a citation aloud. It has a ribbon. It has a seal that smells faintly of bees and smoke. First summons. Second. Peremptory. Each came to a door. Each was read at a threshold. Each was ignored or answered wrongly. He marks the word contumacy with a small flourish. It means you did not come when the bell called. It means the machine may proceed without you. A whisper built this moment. A neighbor said a line in a kitchen. A beetle wrote a name on a wax tablet and smoothed it with his thumb. A rural dean heard the rumor and sent a letter. The chancery answered with ribbon and hour. The file thickened. The room did not grow. Compurgators might have helped, men of standing to swear to a character. They do not stand here now. The town learns what absence looks like when it is tallied. The clerk writes, none produced. The line is short, the shadow is long. The judge asks for a plea. Do you confess? The man says no. The judge asks if he will accept instruction. The man says yes. The judge asks if he will submit to a penance if the court so orders. The man hesitates. He looks at the book. He looks at the cross. He says, at last, if it please God. God is invoked. Paper begins to feel holy, not like thunder, like rope. A chest sits near the sacristy door. 3 locks, 3 keys, the bursars, the deans, the canons. Inside are decrees that look like prayers and fees that look like candles. The clerk could fetch a form that will end today. He does not. He is not the form. He is the hand. Confession hours are posted on a slate near the porch. Morning, Candlemas, Saturdays in Lent. The townspeople glance at the lines the way they glance at the weather. A man who reads the slate understands that mercy can be scheduled. He understands, now, that judgment can be as well. The judge tells the notary to read the articles. Numbered questions, not convictions. Invitations with traps. Do you deny that you spoke against the fast? Do you deny that you refused the peace? Do you deny that you slighted the notice? The man denies. The notary writes, negate. The word looks elegant. It is a door that will not open yet. There are nouns that cool pain. Admonished, corrected, edified. They sit on the page where other words could sit. Punished, condemned. They build a bridge between the altar and the bench. They teach the tongue to step softly while the foot presses down. A man coughs at the back. The sound skips across pews and dies in the choir screen. Windows paint the floor with saints who do not blink. This is not drama. It is process. The town respects process because it hates chaos more than it loves mercy. The judge signals. The beadle brings a stool. The accused sits. The clerk recites the penalties the book allows. Personal ban. Public penance. Fines for contempt. Feasts withheld. Rights withheld. He does not raise his voice to make any of it louder. He does not need to. A woman near the door holds a child who will be baptized when this is over. If this is over, her eyes track the notary's hand instead of the cross. She has learned, without being taught, where power touches the world. The notary writes a word in the margin that tastes like metal. Fama. Public repute. Not evidence. A wind measured by faces. The judge asks if the man has good fame. Some nod. None speak. Fame is a number the clerk will not find on a page. He will find it anyway. Sometimes the court asks water to speak, or iron. Sometimes it asks a crowd. Today it asks a calendar. You will return on the feast of St. Michael. You will bring 2 men willing to swear to your name. You will keep silence where you have been loud. The man bows. He does not argue. A date is a sentence that smiles. The beadle notes the date on a wax tablet. He draws a tiny cross next to it and breathes on the wax to cure it. He tucks the tablet into his cord. He will show it to a housewife later and say nothing. The tablet will do the talking. The judge turns to the priest. Let him be admonished. The priest lifts a stole and says what the book says. The phrases are old and do not surprise anyone. They still work. The man nods. He looks as if he is agreeing to be tired. Outside, the bell rope moves once, as if reminding the room that time is not only a page. The beadle steps into the aisle and calls a second name for a second matter. No witness again. Another oath. The room likes repetition. Repetition feels like proof when proof does not come. You can feel the machinery without seeing it. A citation pinned to a door before dawn. A refusal called default because the bench must call it something. A monition read with a voice that belongs to no household. A peremptory summons that means the next step is sharper. Each instrument looks mild by itself. Together they scrape. There is a ledger in the sacristy. Oil, candles, bread, repairs to a banner. Today, a new line will appear in a careful hand. Copies of admonitions. Paper costs. Mercy costs less when no one needs to see it. Theater costs more. The town pays both. A boy watches from the porch with his chin on the sill. He counts how many times a name is read before the voice moves on. He will count this way all his life. Names become numbers in children before they become numbers in books. The man is told to rise. He does. He is told to sign. He cannot write. He makes a cross that leans. The notary writes, subscripts it, which is a dignified lie the system tells to keep itself tidy. The man turns to go. No chains, no guards. He leaves lighter and heavier all at once. There will be days when hot iron or cold water would have ended this in an hour. Those days are fewer now, sources suggest. The bench prefers verbs it can file and calendars it can defend. The town prefers verdicts that do not need to be unwrapped from bandages. It prefers paper that says, "Come back with men," to smoke that says, "God chose." A murmur rises near the back. Someone says the man is guilty. Someone says the man is proud. Someone says the man is poor. And the poor do not win in rooms where ribbon smells like bees. The murmur is not recorded. It is remembered. A woman whispers to the priest that her child is ill. He hesitates. The notice outside says certain rights are narrowed. The handbook says, "In danger, do not delay." He will step to a threshold at dusk if he must. He will not tell the clerk. Mercy travels faster when it does not need ink. The judge gathers his papers. He nods to the notary, who sands the wet lines and closes the book. The beadle moves to the door to post a copy of the admonition. His pen is sharp, his hand is steady. The wax will take because the day is warm. The accused reaches the porch. The air tastes different outside the nave. Traitors shout again. A dog barks. A boy runs. The man looks down the lane as if looking for a lost witness. He finds only dust. He lifts his hat and sets it back on his head the way a person sets a weight on a shelf. In the chancery, a clerk ties the file with cord and slips it into a drawer that remembers many names. He writes a small index note. Return Street. Michael. He does not know if the man will return. He knows that schedules do. He knows that bells do. There is a map in every system, not on parchment, in habit. A whisper, a tablet, a ribbon, a bench, a line on a slate, a date on a page, a second bell. The map moves people without pushing them. It makes pain look like a calendar. It calls necessity law. We end where we began, with a sound, not a shout. A bell testing its next note. The judge pauses with the seal in his hand. He holds it above the parchment, a heartbeat longer than needed, as if heat could think. The seal hovers. The wax waits. The room leans forward to watch what happens when belief drops onto paper and becomes procedure. Begin with a whisper. Kitchen air. Low voices. A name set down like a cup on a table. The beadle passes the window and hears the cup touch wood. He does not pause. He notes the name on a wax tablet with the corner of his stylus. He smooths the line with his thumb. The tablet goes into his cord. The rumor has a pocket now. Parish first. Always parish first. A priest with a narrow book. A rural dean on visitation. Questions in a voice that does not travel. Who missed the fast? Who quarreled at the porch? Who mocked the feast? The answers arrive in half-phrases. It is said, people talk. The dean writes fama in the margin. Public repute, not proof, weather. Weather becomes paper. A citation is written. Ribbon, seal, a day, an hour. Appear. An apparitor carries it under his cloak. He knows which yard has the dog. He knows which door will not open on the first knock. He knows the weight of refusal. He is paid to carry it. Appear, and the first hearing is soft. A clerk reads the words. The priest reminds you of peace. The note says admonished. It is a small verb with a long tail. Often that is the end. A penance shaped like life. A candle. 3 Fridays. A quiet apology at a porch. The list is satisfied. The market forgets. Do not appear. And the pipeline warms. Second citation. Then peremptory. The last summons has a timbre the street understands. Ignore it. And the clerk writes contumacy in the wide hand he keeps for cold nouns. It means the machine may move with or without you. It prefers with. It is built for without. The file rises to a larger desk. The bishop's official sits there, or the chancellor with his rack of seals. The room is brighter, the table wider, the questions older. On top of the parchment stack lies a libellus, a formal bill of complaint tied with cord. Your name is not rumor now. It is a line item. Procedure has 3 doors. Accusatio, a named accuser who risks penalty if he lies. Denunciatio, public warning for a public sin. Inquisitio, official inquiry without an accuser. After 1215, sources suggest the 3rd door became the hallway. The church learned to ask on its own authority. It learned to number the questions. It learned to schedule the conscience. The notary runs the hour. He writes who stood where, who raised a hand, which candle guttered. The ink flattens tempers into lines the future can stomach. If it is not written, it will be lonely later. He knows this. He writes fast and tidy to keep loneliness out of the record. Oath binds the room to a temperature. One hand on the missal, one eye on a crucifix. Say what you know, not what you fear, not what you hope. To lie is perjury before God. To refuse is a noise the bench can name. Some bring compurgators, neighbors who swear to a life rather than to an event. Many do not. The court likes numbers, not warmth. Evidence is an inventory. Baptism entries. Marriage lines. Tithe receipts. A damaged charter with a hole where a seal once lived. The judge weighs paper, posture, and parish memory on the same scale. He does not sermonize. He chooses verbs that cool. Proved, not proved, to be proved. Fees sit near the ink. A coin for a copy. A coin for a seal. A coin for a clerk who stayed after Vespers to write totals. Posted. Records imply. Negotiable. Sources suggest. Poor remitted sometimes. Friends accelerated sometimes. Both leave fingerprints on margins. Between sessions, time is a co-judge. A terminus is set. Miss it, and your case moves by default. Default is a gentle word that carries teeth. It lets the file walk without your feet. It pleases order. It starves pride. Jurisdictions overlap like lace. A slander that began under a beam in a nave turns into a civic case about market credit. A debt sworn on relics slides into the Guildhall as a broken bond. A lord's quarrel with a chapter dresses itself in doctrine. To borrow a heavier seal, the pipeline is a braid. Law and belief share a comb. Appeals exist. Stairs with Latin on each riser. Archdeacon, bishop, metropolitan. A long hall in a far city where the shelves smell of sea salt and wax. Appeals by time. Time is a currency. Both sides know the rate. Visitations scour and soothe. A bishop arrives with a train. A commissary sets a table, unrolls the articles of inquiry, and asks them like a weather report. Are altars clean? Are bells rung? Are rumors present? Parish officers kneel. Books open. Candles trimmed. The answers are short. Satis bene. Well enough. The phrase is a blanket that warms only the head. Offices populate the corridor. Promoters bring cases. Proctors argue them. Summoners deliver paper. Syndics speak for towns. A few are saints. A few are cousins. The pipeline works with both. It respects schedule more than it respects character. Sacraments give leverage. Baptism, marriage, burial, not only holy things. Handles. To lose them is to lose ordinary time. The valve turns with a small sound. Households feel the pressure in their pipes. It is called discipline in the book. It is called winter in the kitchen. Penalties have vocabulary. Excommunication names a person. Interdict names a place. Suspension narrows what a cleric may touch. Reservation sets sins aside for a bishop's hand. Words matter because doors matter. The right key sits in the right pocket. The wrong key means a longer winter. Confession sits at the center without price. A box, a lattice, a voice. Around it, papers orbit with price tags. Proof of reconciliation. Dispensation for a reserved case. Transfer letters for a penitent who must work in another town. The sacrament is free. The seals are not. The edges take coin even when the heart refuses. Calendars dress law. Market day deadlines. Octaves of saints as borders for action. A penance published on the vigil for maximum weight. A lifting announced after harvest so hands can return to tools without shame burning their backs. Calendars are instruments. They are tunable. Witchcraft, heresy, scandal. Hard nouns sharpen the tone. In such files, articles are read one by one. Do you hold? Do you deny? Answers come verbatim if the notary can hear fast enough. Sources suggest coercion rules varied by place and century. Records imply admonition was preferred, until heat made men less patient. Manuals argue with one another in small, precise lines. Default shapes the hallway. Miss one step and the floor moves anyway. Fail to name compurgators in time. Fail to pay the coin that keeps a copy traveling. Fail to answer in the octave named. The clerk writes nihil nothing and the file advances. Silence becomes a verb. The verb becomes a sentence. Overlap with secular teeth is planned, not accidental. A prison key hangs on a wall near a seal. A sheriff's man leans in a doorway while a notary sands ink. If a ban does not cool a street, a cell might. If a fee does not clear a debt, a levy will. The handshake between knave and hall is old and practiced. There are valves for mercy, discretio, judicial discretion, written in a hand older than any statute. Letters of remission for fights that ended badly and families that cannot absorb a public walk. Commutations that swap linen for loaves. The pipeline has these taps. Not every hand uses them. Reform pulses at intervals. Synods forbid selling what the book calls gift. Chanceries nail fee tables to doors. Manuals for confessors cut back on curiosity. Princes put limits on interdicts that starve a market. Then a decade turns. Zeal returns. Paper tightens. The wheel needs oil again. Clerks see the human through a slot. A notary writes pauperibus remissa, remitted for the poor in a smaller hand than the fee table. A chancellor misfiles a case to the back of a drawer until a rumor cools. A rural dean writes ill where he might have written absent and buys a mother a week. The pipeline tolerates this. It even relies on it. When the pipeline wants theater, it knows the route. Name reading after the gospel. Linen in the square. Candle of a certain weight. Bare feet on the coldest stones. A beetle with a pin to prick proof into a page. Performed as ordered. The script is short. The lesson is long. When the pipeline wants peace, it whispers. A porch apology. A note slid under a door. A reconciliation at dawn with only 2 witnesses and a chill in the nave. The book writes the same verb. Reconciled. The square does not learn. That is part of the mercy. Documents multiply. Act books for minutes. Protocol books for copies. Registers for acts that change lives. A registrar knows which chest holds last winter's thunder and which holds this morning's drizzle. He knows the sound a drawer makes when a seal sticks. He knows how to free it without breaking the wax. Costs accumulate like dust. Candles for publication. Straw for a penitent's feet. Sand for drying pages. Stipends for singers. Repairs to a banner pole. The ledger in the sacristy learns a new line. Procession expenses. The town pays to be its own conscience and calls the bill tradition. Children learn the pipeline like a game. Count the knocks before a door opens. Count the days between a notice and a name. Count the steps around the cross. They will grow into people who know when to kneel because they watched their parents watch a clerk. The pipeline is not iron, it is hands. A beetle who can read a lane. A priest who can lower a word. A clerk who can hear 3 voices at once and write only one. A judge who knows that calendars can cut and calendars can stitch. A schedule kept by bells. Sometimes it breaks. A mob shouts where a hymn should carry. A clerk loses a file and pride calls it providence. A lord slams his seal on a matter that belongs to a book with different margins. The repair takes years. The fees do not stop while the repair is made. Sometimes it hums. A man is admonished and truly mends. A ban is lifted and the market sings. A guild reconciles 2 brothers with a meal and a small fine. The book writes, pacified. The town calls it a good day. It remembers fewer of these than it should. We end in a room where questions wait like tools, articles numbered, oaths folded beside them, a basin, a bar of iron older than the notary's hand, a relic in a case with 2 lamps that have not gone out this winter. The file on the table already knows the words. The town already knows the route. Next, the objects will be called to the bench. Iron will speak in heat. Water will speak in depth. Bread will speak in throats. Books will be opened as if pages could judge. When evidence thins, ritual volunteers. Listen. A lid lifts. A hymn finds the first note. The room leans toward the thing that will decide. Begin with a table. Plain wood. A cloth. 3 objects arranged like witnesses. A bar of iron. A bowl. A book. The clerk notes each on a line as if listing men who will speak. The room quiets. The ritual teaches silence first. Ordeals had grammar. Hot iron, boiling water, cold water, bread and cheese. Combat when pride or rank demanded arms. Sources suggest each was framed as God's judgment, not man's. The scripts were fixed enough to feel ancient and tidy enough to be copied. The notary kept the hour. The priest kept the chant. The bench kept the face that told a crowd to believe. Hot iron first. The bar is weighed. Witnessed. Blessed. The fire is stoked and timed by psalm, not by sand. The accused takes the iron, walks steps, counted by chant, then lays it down. A linen bandage sealed with wax closes the scene. 3 days later, the cloth is opened before witnesses. Records imply that adjectives decided clean, angry, suspicious. The verbs were cooler, proved, not proved. The wound is never named, only the verdict island. Boiling water speaks the same language with a different mouth. A ring or stone is dropped to a measured depth. The priest blesses the water, the hand descends, seals return on cloth. On the 3rd day, the bandage opens, and eyes decide what pages will write. Manuals wink at discretion. The water must be suitable. The pause before suitable did much work. Sources suggest friends of the court sometimes breathed for the accused. Cold water reverses the logic. If earth rejects you, so will water. A rope around the waist. A pool near a church. The accused is lowered. To float is to be refused. To sink is to be received. Hands wait, eyes watch. The record writes, pulled free, and keeps the noun steady. Later tradition claims the guilty bobbed like wood. Records imply many sank as any frightened body might. Either way, the line on the page remains a straight line. It always does. Bread and cheese coarsened is rarer and wrapped in polemic. A swallow blessed and sworn over. If the liar choked, guilt owned him. If he swallowed, truth owned the room. Sources are thin and suspicious. Many survive as scorn. The idea remains. Food as witness. A throat as judge. The bench like proofs that fit in a mouth. Combat borrows from oaths in theater. A field marked. A sun watched. A priest and a herald. One counting prayers. One counting bounds. 2 men swear that God will choose. A victor stands. The crowd exhales, as if certainty just touched ground. Records imply that magistrates preferred settlement. Combat cost time, coin, and dignity when it did not end the way a city needed. Pride often hired the sword anyway. Objects were coached to speak without chaos. Iron was weighed, water was measured, bandages were sealed with 2 seals, not 1. Candles were tallied. Witnesses signed with crosses and names. The choreography promised fairness, the way an evenly set table promises a fair meal. A tidy psalm can quiet doubt better than a speech. Relics worked as lie detectors the town could love. A saint's arm behind glass. A splinter in a cross-shaped reliquary. 2 lamps that never went out in winter. Hands pressed to cases. Foreheads bowed. Oaths spoken, in the presence of one who cannot lie. When perjury followed, rumor blamed the man, not the bone. The object kept its good name. The perjurer lost his. Oracles walked, A statue on a barquet, bearers swaying. At a fork, the priest asked. The god nodded. Sources suggest the nods had help ropes hidden in cloth, a tilt leaned into by men with strong shoulders and stronger convictions. Records imply the crowd did not demand engineering notes. A nod that soothed a quarrel was a good nod. The square prefers peace, with incense, to peace with ink. Lots and verses visited courts in soft shoes. Sortes opening sacred text and taking the first line as counsel was not doctrine, but habit. A psalm that fell like a verdict could settle an elder's doubts. The judge would not cite it. He would simply feel steadier and write in a firmer hand. The moralist grumbled. Canonists wrote cautions in small, hard lines. Do not tempt God. Let not the sacraments be made instruments of trial. Use witnesses, not wonders. They scolded with respect. They knew the appetite for spectacle would not starve because a page frowned. After 1215, the church's center told its edges to stop burning and boiling. The Fourth Lateran Council chilled the water and cooled the iron by discouraging ordeals. Bishops stepped back. Clerks stepped forward. Testimony and process replaced heat. Sources suggest change came in seasons, not in a day. Records imply that in backfields and border towns, priests kept the chant until a visitation hissed. Urban benches swapped cauldrons for articles faster than villages did. But myth did not resign. It transferred. Relics moved from proof to consolation. Ordeals ceded the bench to questions numbered and oaths verified. Combat shrank into stylized duels that served honor more than law. The crowd learned a new furniture. A list read aloud. A penance scripted like a procession. A candle weighed as carefully as a sword once was. Compurgation stood between worlds. Not evidence. Character. Neighbors swore to a person, not an event. 12 good men and true in one region. A handful in another. The bench liked the sound of virtue under oath. The city liked the cost, cheap compared to iron. But populations grew. Trust thinned. Strangers multiplied. Compurgation faltered where neighbors became customers with short memories and long ledgers. Paper learned how to do what iron once did. Articles listed charges as questions. Do you deny that you spoke against the feast? Do you deny that you refused the peace? Answer, no. And the quill wrote confesses. Answer, yes. And the quill wrote negate. Enough yeses in a row. And the bench said malitiosa negatio, malicious denial. Refusal to play the script became the proof the script was built to find. Bandages turned into deadlines. 3 days once decided a hand. Now, 8 days decided a case. Return on the octave. Produce 2 men. Bring a letter sealed. A calendar did the work of a cauldron without smoke. The crowd trusted dates. It had learned to. Objects still sat in the room, heavy with memory. A bowl near the bench held no hot water now, only sand for drying ink. A bar of iron sat under a cloth as a paperweight. A relic watched the oath, not the plunge. The room felt safer. It also felt less honest to those who craved the finality of a wound. Abuses moved with the instruments, not away from them. A priest leaned on adjectives. Suitably hot. Properly deep. Sufficiently healed. Later, a clerk leaned on verbs that cooled pain into piety. Corrected instead of punished. Edified instead of shamed. The bench did not always lie. It often softened the temperature of words so a city could keep eating. The appeal of ordeals was not only drama, it was closure. A hand either healed to the court's satisfaction, or it did not. Cold water either held you, or it did not. Bread either fought your throat or slid past the place where doubt sits. Proof that bleeds ritual becomes memory quicker than proof that sits in files. We remember a nod more readily than a deposition. Officials staged fairness to defend ritual. Witnesses under oath to the weight of iron. Seals laid across bandages in the presence of 2 men from each side. Candles paced by psalms, not by one man's count. The choreography reassured the sober and silenced the skeptical. It also tempted the crafty. If a chant can time heat, a chant can stretch. Not every bench liked the old scripts. Some refused from the start, some refused at the end. Visitations added lines. No boiling, no iron, no water tests. Fines followed, training followed. Handbooks waspish with "do not." The rituals retreated to gossip. They survived in stories longer than they survived in rooms. In other places, other instruments wore different nouns and served the same hunger. Imperial China examined confessions too often coaxed over beaters and benches. Early modern consistories read minutes instead of bandages. Ottoman courts allowed tazir discretion to cool a crowd without scars. Tokugawa magistrates used shaved patches and placards where iron once walked. The metaphors changed. The need for an ending did not. What we call spectral evidence in witchcraft prosecutions belongs to a later fever, and historians quarrel over its scope. Sources suggest its legal acceptance was narrow and brief, even where panic ran high. Later tradition claims more than the dockets permit. Here, caution is a thermometer. The cooler we write, the closer we get to the truth the records can bear. Whatever the instrument, oaths bound the room. One hand on a book, one eye on a witness who could not blink. Tell it. Keep it. Stand by it. The weight of an oath outlived iron and survives algorithms. It is cheaper than heat and dearer than rumor. It is the bridge between heaven and the minute book. Meanwhile, the crowd learned to treat ritual like verdict. It already had. A bandage opened in daylight. A rope pulled at a pool. A loaf swallowed without a cough. Cues a city could carry home and repeat over soup. When paper replaced iron, the crowd needed new cues. It found them in names read aloud and candles walked. It found them in linen and roots, and a beetle's pin. The theater moved. The actor stayed. A small case shows the handoff. A theft with no witness. 50 years earlier, the iron would have been warmed. Now, the judge asks for fama public repute. For indicia, signs that point. For two men to swear to the accused's life. The defendant denies. The clerk writes negate. A deadline is set. In 8 days, return with character. The hand remains whole. The calendar bleeds quietly in its place. Another case asks water to speak once more, because a village has only one priest and no notary. The pool is a ditch. The rope is a belt. The chant is short because the priest is old. The man sinks. The village claps relief into the cold. A year later, a bishop frowns and writes a line. No more water. The village sighs and learns to love lists. We should not pretend all change bent mercy's way. Some courts used numbered questions to trap rather than to weigh. Some used oaths to force confessions that satisfied files more than consciences. Some used calendars to starve pride. The instruments changed sound, not always purpose. But we should not pretend the old ways were all cruelty. A bar of iron could be lighter than a slander. A plunge could be kinder than a feud. A nod from a statue could dissolve a fight without a dozen dead. People used what they had. They shaped it with the best minds in the room and the worst appetites in the square. In every method, discretion lived in small places. A priest timed heat by psalm and chose the psalm. A clerk wrote suitable and fixed the suit. A judge opened a bandage in better light. A beetle stood closer to a rope. These choices the inches decided lives more often than the posters did. The archive remembers the apparatus. It remembers the seals pressed into bandage wax. It remembers the brand of linen that took ink well. It remembers the word satis beside a healing that was good enough to make a market breathe. It does not remember the sting under cloth. It cannot. It was not designed to. So we read the margins for heat. A notary writes, done with tears. A dean adds poor remitted below a fee. A clerk notes wind high near a cold water test and crowd large near a bandage opening. These are the places where ritual confessed it was still human. The old instruments are quiet now. The iron rests. The water cools. The bread goes to kitchens. The bark stays in a chapel. But the need for a public ending remains. A city still wants to see decisions. It wants to sing yes while it watches someone walk a line. Which brings us to the next room. No iron, no water, only bodies ordered into meaning, banners, linen, names read, a candle of a certain weight, a path that teaches without speaking. If objects once served as witnesses, the crowd will now volunteer. The choir will become the court. The street will hold its breath and learn the shape of a verdict with its own feet. Begin with a line, not of law, of bodies. A beadle first, book and pen. A clerk behind him with a narrow strip of parchment. He keeps his thumb on the next name. He sets the pace. The town falls in, banners lift, guild colors, confraternities, a torch guttering in daylight because the right remembers night. Linen on shoulders, bare feet on stone. The script is not in blood. It is in a leaflet. Chant finds the key. A refrain simple enough for a child. Have mercy. Be restored. The note carries people who would not walk alone. Amen becomes a signature that needs no ink. Placement is policy. Women to the right aisle, veiled when manuals say so. Men to the left, magistrates in the transept where the eye lands. Guild elders under pillars where a nod looks like consent. A bench left empty for the excommunicate who has not asked. Architecture teaches the verdict before anyone speaks it. A name is read. The linen steps forward. The clerk pricks the page. 1 hole means done. 2 means returned late. The parchment gathers wounds that become totals. Later, the act book will write 4 words with a seal, performed as ordered. Shame is administered like medicine. A candle of a set weight. A root that always stumbles on the 3rd step near the cross. A stop at the porch, where the priest raises a hand and lowers it. No jeers. They are not needed. Silence does the heavier work. Vendors close shutters as the line passes. Some slip a fig to a child with bare feet and call it nothing. Others fold cloth twice and look down. Sources suggest towns permitted such kindness within rules. Records imply the ledger never learned these gestures. Kitchens did. Sermons give the crowd its script. Be edified, not entertained. Pray for the erring. The pulpit gives the verbs that cool. The street supplies breath. The theater looks like worship and behaves like discipline. Security looks like courtesy. Sergeants walk the flank, poles low. A raised voice meets an open palm, down. A mother taps a child's shoulder before a giggle takes shape. Noise that belongs to markets is asked to wait. The square drafts itself into quiet. Dates are instruments. Market day for maximum witness. Vigil for maximum meaning. A route that passes the houses with shutters that always tremble when names are read. The choreography has a memory. It returns to corners that remember better than straight streets do. Counting happens even among tears. How many candles? How many banners? How many names? The magistrate in the transept tallies in his head. He hears a number he can use in a letter. Reconciled, absent, remitted. Numbers are polite weapons. Children learn geometry from the procession. Which stone holds cold longer? Where the echo thickens. Where the hymn always thins. They play the right later in alleys and get the turns right. They grow into adults who need no cue. Exceptions exist and keep order humane. Dawn walks for those whose trades must open. Veils and escorts for women. Shortened routes in plague or snow. Sources suggest scripts bent with weather. The principle did not. Shunning is social arithmetic. The innkeeper pours water, not wine. The guild deacon waits 3 heartbeats before answering. A bench at dinner sits 1 pace farther from the fire. None of this is on the notice. All of it is legible in faces. The city learns to be a jury without benches. Commerce takes cues from linen. A reconciled man can swear again in court. Credit returns. A woman's penance lifts, and her stall opens on feast days. A quiet clause in a contract wakes because a candle has been carried. The discipline of souls translates into schedules and sales. Some resist within the key. A woman sings a half-beat late, so the refrain turns into a question. A man walks with his hood up under noon and is not told to drop it. A child stares at the beetle's pin as if it were a tiny sword. Dissent lives in the edges. The register will not catch it. Memory will. Mistakes happen, and the ritual contains them. A penitent trips, a candle gutters, a banner pole cracks. The chant wavers, then steadies. The lesson is the same. The rite is stronger than any body in it. Comfort and warning in one breath. At the porch, formulas close the scene. Go in peace. Do penance no more. A hand rests, lifts. The congregation inhales. Relief moves through people who did not kneel. Belonging is a room with a door and a schedule. Everyone has felt the latch. Costs are tabulated elsewhere. Linen to wash, candles to replace, straw for the root, stipends for singers. A clerk will later add procession expenses to the sacristy ledger. A city pays to be its own conscience and calls the bill tradition. A town under interdict becomes a theater of absence. No bells, no weddings, graves opened without song. The crowd learns where its courage usually sits under cadence. When cadence is removed, backs must find a new spine. Some do. Many wait for sound. The crowd supplies evidence that paper cannot. Faces, postures, a murmured acceptance that turns a penalty into a norm. A city rehearses obedience until it becomes muscle memory. After enough walks, shame is a habit rather than a shout. Observers observe the observers. A canon notes which guildmaster looked away on the keyline. A reeve marks who sang and who mouthed. These small notes breed files. Files breed futures. The crowd performs. Offices attend. Memory acquires teeth. Charity tethers to spectacle. Donors tie ribbons to banners. Names read with thanks at the end. Alms for hospitals collected while linen passes. Endowments fund lights that burn during penance. The rite learns to feed bodies while it disciplines them. It calls the braid mercy. Abuses creep and are corrected. A beetle pricks too hard and is told to ease. A magistrate times a walk to humiliate a rival and is checked by a dean. Synods forbid turning penance into parade. Manuals warn against cruelty. The cycle repeats. Zeal, excess, repair. Not every name is read. Some are withheld. Private, for now. A priest moves a reconciliation to dawn. A chancellor buys a day by misplacing a strip. The crowd never knows. That is part of the kindness. Mercy often chooses darkness over drama. A last refrain. Softer. Banners dip. Shoes lift off cold stone. Vendors open shutters. Brass clinks. Children run. The square exhales. The rite dissolves back into stalls and ovens. The lesson stays behind like warmth in a bench. In the sacristy, the clerk dries ink with sand and closes the register. A courier waits for the copy that will ride to the bishop's desk. In the guild hall, a magistrate drafts a letter that turns counts into policy. In the chancery, a table waits with 2 inkwells. The crowd has adjourned. The court has not. Behind the nave, in rooms where ledgers breathe and seals cool, administrators will turn song into sentences, roots into receipts, amen into entries. The next door opens on their desks. The pin becomes a pen. The chorus becomes a column. Listen, the latch lifts. Begin with a desk. Oak rubbed smooth by wrists. An inkstone. A shaker of sand. A seal that cools slower than the room. This is where chaos is taught to sit. The clerk owns the hour. He arranges the file. Citation, monitions, articles, notes of fame, copies for posting, fees due. He writes in a hand that makes heat look tidy. Admonished, corrected, reconciled, verbs that cool. He sands the wet line and breathes. His breath is policy. The notary owns the memory. He names who stood where, who raised a hand, where the candle went out. He is stingy with adjectives and rich with time. He writes weather. He writes the bell. He writes appeared for the man who trembled and absent for the man who hid. Ink chooses what a town is allowed to remember. The beetle owns the street. Wax tablet in his cord. Pin in his palm. He posts the strip on the door when told. pricks the page when linen passes, notes the late, the sullen, the ill. His walk is the bridge between paper and bodies. His steady hand saves the system from having to shout. The chancellor owns the calendar. He decides that the octave will do. He decides the vigil will teach better than market day. He misfiles a case to buy a mother a week. He tightens another when a rumor needs to end before it becomes a song. He calls it administration. It is mercy with a desk. The official owns the seal. He keeps 3 in a drawer, one of lead, one of wax, one he uses rarely and only after prayer. He knows the weight each drops on a square. He knows a ribbon is a leash. He knows a leash can be a lifeline. The registrar owns the map, act books for minutes, protocol books for copies, registers for acts that change lives. He knows which chest holds thunder and which holds drizzle. He knows how to free a stuck drawer without cracking the wax inside. His titles are small. His reach is long. Confession hours belong to the sacristy but live on a slate. Morning, Saturdays in Lent. After Vespers by appointment. Around that posted mercy, papers orbit with prices. Proof of reconciliation, dispensation for reserved cases, letters to carry absolution to another parish. The sacrament is free. The edges are not. Edges keep offices open. Casus reservati, reserved sins belong upward. Only the bishop may lift them. The parish priest writes a neat note, seals it with the smallest stamp, and sends a runner. The runner returns with ribbon, absolved, deferred. One word moves a household from winter into weather. The desk made the season change. Proctors and promoters keep the hallway alive. One argues, one pursues. One knows the custom of this diocese. One knows the habit of that judge. Both speak Latin that tastes like iron. They keep zeal inside sentences. They are the professional spine of systems built to pretend they have none. The bursar owns the price of piety. He balances candles against copies, linen against singers, processions against roofs. He opens the coffer with 3 keys and writes 2 inks, black for totals, red for promises. He adds a small line. Fees remitted. 5. He does not name faces. He remembers them. Gaolers and stewards sit where sacred and secular shake hands. Bread and water rationed by schedule. Irons paid to be loosened. Daylight sold by the hour. They speak the language of custom with a voice that never rises. Their books look like weather until you count the storms. Inquisitors, when the file says so, arrive with numbered articles and a manual that says what the mouth may ask. Some obey the book's narrow road. Some press the edges and call it necessary. The notary writes verbatim when he can keep up. He writes pauses. He does not write tears. The fee table pretends to be a fence. Posted in the chancery. Copied on a door. A coin for a seal. A coin for a copy. A coin for the clerk who stays late. Poor remitted sometimes. Friends accelerated sometimes. The table is theater. The room is negotiation. Words behave like tools. Scandal widens jurisdiction. Peace justifies speed. Unity blesses reach. These nouns let a seal fall farther than a prayer ever could. Administrators learn them the way sailors learn winds. Metrics leak into minutes. Reconciled. 25. Absent. 4. Remitted. 5. A magistrate turns them into policy. Praise to discipline. A dean turns them into mercy. Thanks for alms. The same numbers wear 2 faces and walk down 2 different alleys. Behind the order sits habit. A clerk who always writes status for healings that are good enough. A dean who always notes frost when bare feet are ordered. A chancellor who times reconciliations to harvest. These small rules tame a machine that was not built to feel. Abuses live here too. A cousin who moves a file up the pile. A notary who prefers corrected where shame belongs. A beetle who pricks too hard. Synods bark. Handbooks hiss. Princes set limits. A decade passes. The wheel needs oil again. Reform is a ledger in motion. Fee tables nailed to doors. Pardoners checked. Ordeals cooled and then boxed. Confession manuals telling confessors to ask once and not pry. Appeals posted, not whispered. Each adjustment is a small hinge. Together they move a town's weight from spectacle to schedule. None of this is grand. All of it is power. Rights withheld and restored by entry. Names read by strip. Schedules made to bite or to bend. Souls treated like appointments. The crowd sees only the walk and the prayer. The offices turn the walk into totals and the prayer into a seal. If you need an image, use a drawer. Inside, a ribboned libellus, a strip with 2 pinholes, a receipt for candles, a note that says pauperibus remissa, a letter of remission folded around a coin stain. The drawer is a city's conscience in objects. It will outlast the voices. What the administrators share is posture. They lower heat. They speak in verbs that keep rooms standing. They love lists because lists survive. They trust calendars because calendars obey. They choose where to place the theater. In the square for teaching, at a desk for repair. On good days, they choose well. Not every desk belongs to one faith or one crown. Other courts have other nouns, other seals, other ways to cool a crowd. A KI's register, a consistory's minute book, a yaman's dossier, a panchayat's palm leaf, a guild's statute roll. Different scripts, same hands. Open the next drawer. It smells of salt and step, of incense and ink. Files from places that prayed in other directions, but scheduled in the same way. Cases where iron was never heated but oaths were. Cases where shame wore wood instead of linen. We cross thresholds now, Francia to Isfahan, Lucca to Luoyang, Geneva to Granada, to watch how belief in law taught their crowds to nod. Open a map, fold it by rivers, not borders. The machinery repeats. Begin in a Carolingian churchyard. Early files are thin. Ordeals speak. Hot iron. Boiling water. Cold pools that receive or reject. After 1215, the center cools the heat. Parish courts pivot to fama, public repute, and indicia signs that point. Compurgators stand where iron once stood. 12 men swear to a life, not to a scene. Sources suggest the shift felt safer. Records imply it also felt slower. Calendars replaced flames. Moved to a bishop's hall in 14th century France. The official reads numbered articles. Do you deny? Do you persist? The accused answers negate until the clerk adds malitiosa negatio, malicious denial. Refusal becomes proof. Confession schedules do the rest. The verdict fits inside a date. Turn to Spain's tribunals. They come with manuals and chests. Edicts of grace invite self-accusation on a clock. Abjurations are graded. De levi for the light, de vehementi for the heavy. Relapse is a word that bites. An auto appears as theater. Robes, lists, formulas. Pain sits off stage. Paperwork stands center. Sources suggest the Spanish kept better files than their enemies admitted. Records imply spectacle still taught the crowd. At a rural German witch trial, rumor arrives as weather. Spectral claims knock at the door. She came in a dream. A shape pinched the child. Historians quarrel over scope. Sources suggest legal acceptance of such evidence was narrow and brief where it existed at all. Panic speaks louder than dockets. Confessions are coaxed to fit the script. Later tradition claims more than registers allow. Caution keeps the ink cool. Florence writes morality in minutes. A consistory summons neighbors. Wine too free. Songs too loud. The ledger says, admonished. The band says, suspended from table. Proof is not wounds. Proof is lists. 2 months later, reconciled. A city rehearses virtue by appointment. Step east into a Ming yamen. The magistrate sits behind a high table. A drum waits for petitioners. A dossier thickens testimonies, family registers, shop tallies. Confession is the hinge. Sources suggest a case is not truly closed without one. Xing punishments hover in the file. A coroner's text teaches evidence, bruises, drownings, poison, but the habit remains. A clean confession makes a clean page. Records imply that discretion paced the room more than doctrine did. Ottoman courts fold order into sigil books. A kai weighs bayina, two upright witnesses, or moves to yamin, an oath. When both fail, tazir keeps peace. A warning, a brief exposure, a fine. Sulh settlement ends the heat. The register reads like weather again. Calm, scattered showers, no storm. The faith frames the room. The verbs keep it steady. Cross to a caliphate bazaar. A mutasib walks with scales. He fines for fraud. He closes a stall for scandal. No trial with drums, a schedule with teeth. Friday pulpits supply words. Ledgers supply hours. Records imply the tool is a soft interdict, temporary, public, effective. Turn to Tokugawa streets. Goningumi, 5 household groups bind neighbors to neighbors. Teroke slips prove temple affiliation. Kosatsu boards, post bans and morals. Confessions sit beside community surety. Shame is measured. Hair, distance, service. Sources suggest quiet penalties, train the lane. Records imply spectacle was rare and choreographed when it came. In a Jewish bet din, law prefers eyes and ears, 2 witnesses or a clear admission. Without them, Iram the band moves carefully. Notices in Hebrew and the vernacular. Commerce pauses. Reconciliation is scripted. Pinkasim minute books record sat apart and then returned with modest lines. The verbs are precise. The community survives its own heat. A village panchayat sits on mats. Elders listen. Proof is local memory. Sanctions are social. Feasts withheld. Fasts assigned. A walk of apology, then a shared meal. Sources suggest variation by region and century. Reformers scold. The mechanism holds. Exclusion by right, return by right. Geneva writes thunder in neat hands. A consistory warns, suspends, restores. Admonished. Reconciled. Refused. The pulpit shakes the air. The minutes cool it. Records imply many cases ended in conversation, not spectacle. The crowd still learn posture. In late medieval England, secular and sacred hands braid. Gaol delivery brings prisoners up by schedule. Manorial courts find scandal, while parish courts read names. A pillory sits near a porch. A sermon makes the pillory a lesson. A fee list makes the sermon policy. Proofless? Not always. Proof thin? Often. The calendar carries the rest. Mamluk Cairo turns rumor into regulation. Market inspectors weigh bread. Sufi lodges police their own with silence and service. A disciple who broke rule keeps lamps for a month and returns without parade. Sources suggest this quiet discipline kept storms out of streets. Records imply the notes say little and the kitchens remember much. Iberian towns under interdict show the heaviest hand. Bells stop. Weddings halt. Markets whisper. The cause can be doctrine. It can be a charter quarrel, dressed in creed. Princes negotiate. Chapters relent. Lifts arrive with formulas. Minutes learn, lifted, as a mercy that looks like policy. Colonial New England pairs stocks with sermons. A confession before the congregation fits the Sunday cadence. Names are read, signs worn. The ledger names a fine. The crowd banks a lesson. Later, apologia, in notes our new linen will copy the posture with fonts. Sources suggest the pattern never quite left. Everywhere, the same 4 moves recur. Rumor becomes schedule. Office becomes ritual. Absence becomes evidence. Community becomes court. The nouns change. The verbs hold. Bias colors each scene. Hagiography glows. Polemic burns. Officials justify. Critics exaggerate. We triangulate. Register plus account, plus sermon. Dossier plus witness, plus proverb. When 3 scales hum the same note, we listen. And always, a budget waits at the edge. Fees for copies. Fines for peace. Dues for seats and candles. Ransom of shunning paid in loaves. In hours, in coin. Records imply that money followed morality the way a bell follows a hand. The ledger never misses the chorus. What did these courts buy with their scripts? Order, they say. Unity, they say. Property and peace, the files whisper when no one is listening. Next, we speak plainly about motive. Who paid? Who profited? Who learned to turn faith into a lever that moved more than souls? Begin with a ledger, not a sermon. 2 inks, black for totals, red for promises. A margin note. Fees remitted. 5. Another. Fines collected. 12. The page looks pious. It behaves like a purse. Power arrives first, polite and heavy. A ruler quarrels with a chapter. The law is municipal. The leverage is sacred. An interdict lands. Bells stop. Markets dim. The prince writes 2 letters. One to condemn excess. One to invite negotiation. He is not choosing theology. He is choosing a speed of obedience. Records imply interdicts often ended in treaties, not conversions. Power counts treaties as proof. Property follows power like a cart behind an ox. A heresy file thickens. An office opens a chest. Forfeiture clauses wake. Lands once argued over become returned to order. A house becomes held in trust. A shop is reassigned for the common good. Sources suggest beneficiaries were rarely the poor. The rhetoric said purity. The receipts said transfer. Peace pays its own way. A town tired of feud prefers ritual to knives. A band channels fury into a schedule. Public penance turns revenge into a walk. The crowd exhales on market day and calls it justice. The magistrate calls it cost avoidance. Fewer bodies. Fewer fires. Peace that can be budgeted is peace that power understands. Famine sharpens motives. Grain is thin. Fear is thick. Rumor needs a throat. Scapegoats arrive, as they do. Charges grow legs, the way drought grows cracks. A trial without evidence supplies an ending everyone can carry. The file acquires a fee. The crowd acquires a story. The storehouses acquire a little quiet. Later tradition claims courage. Records imply triage. Plague adds a darker arithmetic. Processions forbid crowds, then need them. Bans isolate, then punish isolation. Shunning for health becomes shunning for guilt. A curfew enforced by the parish feels gentler than soldiers at doors. It also costs less. The ledger learns to spell pity as policy. Guilds play both sides. They endow altars and expect a voice at the porch. They police members' morals and expect favorable rulings on market disputes. A brother, suspended from table, arrives at a hearing with a master who has already paid for a candle. The decision smells like incense and dues. Sources suggest guild piety stabilized cities. Records imply it also purchased lenience in small, human ways. Confiscation can hide in liturgy. A condemned man's tools are dedicated to an altar's upkeep. A house implicated in scandal is cleansed and reassigned to a hospital. The words are clean. The map changes hands. Power calls it reparation. The widow calls it winter. Fees do not confess themselves as motives. They stack and smile. A coin for the copy. A coin for the seal. A coin for the clerk who stayed late. A coin for publication by procession. The table is posted. The poor are remitted, sometimes. The total still warms the coffer. A system that never breaks even cannot last. A system that profits quietly needn't shout. Princes learn to launder coercion through piety. A charter that narrows a town's franchise travels with a reliquary to bless the reading. The crowd hears a saint before it hears a clause. Unity. Peace. Order. Words that justify reach. Words that float on incense and land as statutes. Churchmen learn to launder piety through coercion. A reform that bites is announced with mercy on the same day. Fees standardized. Poor remitted. Pardoners checked. Hospitals endowed. The gesture is real. So is the control. Records imply cycles. Zeal, excess, correction, fatigue, renewal. Motive survives the adjectives. Economies form around shame. Linen makers sell to sacristies. Candle vendors count penances in wax. Singers receive stipends proportional to reconciliations performed at the porch. A city learns to budget for conscience as if conscience were cobblestone. The math is not evil. It is familiar. Ransom appears in civic dress. Peace money to lift bands that starve a ward. Gifts to expedite reconciliations before a harvest. Voluntary contributions to end a dispute between bishop and magistrate. It is not called ransom. It behaves like ransom. The receipt reads in devotion. Minorities feel motive sooner. Jews are fined for alleged scandals, then protected for a sum. Heretics are punished in principle, then offered settlement in practice. Foreigners are named in sermons, then taxed at gates. Power learns to rent forgiveness. Property learns to creep without footsteps. Spectacle sells policy. An auto with lists and robes persuades towns that order is awake. A penance route that passes 3 donor houses persuades donors that gifts matter. A public lifting before a feast persuades guilds that the city remembers who paid for light. The right carries receipts under linen. Clerks are not blind. Some refuse to harden a line that will break a back. Others capture mercy in Latin, so successors will imitate it. Pauperbus remissa, done with tears. Margins that have no budget column, only weather and faces. Motive is tempered by men who like sleeping. Princes are not devils. Many want quiet streets and fat loaves. They prefer a fine to a riot. They prefer a walk to a fire. They borrow sacred gravity to stabilize markets, because markets feed armies and roofs. The result is often gentler than soldiers. The fiction is that it is free. Peace is the word that forgives many teeth. Peace that halts weddings and burials until a signature appears. Peace that requires 30 names and a procession. Peace that retires a rival from office under the name scandal. Peace becomes a reason. Reasons become a habit. Notaries write nouns that widen reach. Scandal justifies jurisdiction after rumor has done its job. Unity justifies speed when an appeal would be costly. Fame lets absence stand as proof when witnesses are scarce. This is not conspiracy. It is vocabulary. Money changes temperature at the edges. Indulgences, when honest, fund bridges, hospitals, lamps for the poor. When dishonest, they fund cousins. Both wear the same ribbon. Both leave the same smell of wax. Sources suggest reform never scared money away. It changed columns. Comparisons keep us modest. A qadi uses tazir to warn rather than whip. Is that mercy or crowd control? A consistory admonishes wine singers in Geneva and restores them next month. Is that pastoral care or social budgeting? A Tokugawa magistrate shaves a patch and writes a placard. Is that education or spectacle? Motive often answers, yes. The poor pay in time. A morning at the porch instead of in the field. A day in linen instead of at the stall. A fee remitted, but bread lost. The rich pay in coin and keep their hours. The ledger says both were reconciled. The kitchen says costs were different. Families pay in postponements. A wedding delayed until a father's name is read. A burial without song because a quarrel wrote itself in Latin. A child baptized at dusk because a notice narrowed the day. Peace is a calendar before it is a virtue. Calendars bite. Offices pay in legitimacy. A court that can stage penance on schedule and lift on schedule convinces a city it knows the weather. Predictability is a power stronger than fear. It makes people arrange their days without a knock. Markets pay in predictability. A ban that halts trade on Tuesday and lifts on Friday is a nuisance. A ban that lingers for a season is an injury. A system that can time hurt teaches merchants to plan around hurt. They call that stability. They are not wrong. They are not happy. Motives admit themselves in very small places. A beetle pricks harder near a rival's shop. A chancellor times a lifting to align with a donor's feast. A dean counts reconciliations before a visitation. These are not crimes. They are weather patterns in rooms with no windows. Sometimes the mask drops. A prince writes for confiscation and cites heresy in a case that smelled of tax. A bishop bans a ward and then accepts a gift to raise the curtain. Chroniclers note thunder. Account books note roofs repaired. Both are true. Motive is not a villain. It is gravity. Sometimes conscience wins. A charter forbids interdicts that starve whole towns for a noble's quarrel. A synod posts fees and jails partners who improvise. A city funds hospitals without squeezing penance into baskets. Peace keeps its teeth, but learns manners. Ask who profits. Offices that post hours and collect fees. Princes who convert chaos into predictable obedience. Guilds that buy honor and receive lenience. Donors who trade light for place. Ask who pays. The quiet, the poor, the different, the late. The ones rumor can carry farther than proof can walk. End on the word every file loves. Order. The ledgers call it the fruit of discipline. The sermons call it the harvest of piety. The market calls it the price of sleep. All three push the same seal onto wax that does not argue. The ink dries. The drawer shuts. The bell tests a note for tomorrow. We have named the levers behind the rights. Next, we lift the page to the light and watch the fibers show. The sources that cool pain. The spin that warms crowds. The silences that swallow names. The archive is ready to confess. Are we ready to listen? Hold the page to the light. Ink thins. Fibers show. Some facts darken. Some vanish. That is how the archive speaks. Start with court rolls. Parish act books. Archdeaconry registers. Names stacked like steps. Verbs repeated until they lose their bark. Admonished. Cited. Reconciled. Totals in the margin. Fees on the last line. The tone is calm even when lives are not. Records imply that routine did most of the work. Bishops' registers breathe procedure. Citations issued. Monitions read. Peremptories posted. Appeals lodged. A ribbon of Latin that calls pain, care. Pro salute anime for the health of the soul. The phrase lowers the temperature. It also hides how much a calendar can bite. Visitations read like weather. Articles of inquiry copied town to town. Are fasts kept? Are bells rung? Do neighbors slander? Answers. Short, cautious, local. A clerk writes satis bene well enough more often than truth can carry. Sources suggest visitations saw only what coffers could afford to repair. Municipal accounts pay the bill and whisper the script. Straw for processions, candles for reconciliations, sand for drying pages, a gratuity for singers, a new pin for a beetle, fees remitted for the poor. The numbers do not moralize, they point. The town funded its own theater and called it order. Notarial books turn air into proof. Copies of admonitions. Certificates of reconciliation. Transfer letters for penance that needs to travel. Seals pressed and signed. The formula performed as ordered appears so often you stop seeing it. Then you notice how final it sounds. A life condensed to 4 words in raised wax. Penitentials and confession handbooks carry the grammar under the skin. What to ask, what to assign, when to publish a name and when to keep it quiet. Later tradition claims cruelty. These books worry about justice in small measures. They also count. 3 Fridays in linen, 40 days without meat, mercy by schedule. Sermons explain and persuade. Some thunder. Most instruct. Your alms accompany grace, they do not purchase it. Your shame will teach, it will not damn. Preachers marry policy to parable. They add a story where a statute would creak. The pulpit is a hinge between belief and bench. Hagiography lights the room too brightly. Saints tame tyrants. Bands lift with miracles. A stubborn sinner melts before a relic. The genre has motives. It sells imitation and gifts. Sources suggest borrowing hagiography for procedure is a mistake. It teaches desire, not detail. Polemic darkens the same room. Tracts sneer. Pamphlets hiss. One side calls every fee simony, the other calls every protest rebellion. Satirists draw the pardoner with a bag too fat and a grin too wide. Later tradition claims the extreme as the ordinary. We mark it. We keep reading. Guild statutes, and confraternity rules steady the hand. Attendance required, processions ordered, alms scheduled, sanctions named and scaled. A brother out of rule sits apart until reconciled. The nouns are civic and sacred at once. These rules are the social spine of spectacle. Royal and princely charters step in when thunder cracks. Limits on interdicts. Protections for markets during bans. Confirmations of episcopal jurisdiction with windows left open for appeal. Politics plays the organ. The choir keeps time. Archaeology interrupts with things that do not flinch. Drip trays for wax near porches. Pins in thresholds. Worn steps on the route penitents walked. Seals lost in floor dust. A pillory socket cut twice, as if the first hole did not satisfy a later crowd. Objects do not explain. They refuse to lie. Art frames the memory as a lesson. Woodcuts of processions under towers with clocks. Panels of ordeal scenes that look tidy enough to pass for order. The guilty kneel. The righteous stand near banners. Perspective bends to fit a moral. Believe the layout. Doubt the faces. Pain is not paint. Inscriptions preserve the donor's voice. For the poor. For the bells. For my soul. A stone repeats a name each year and pays the choir to do it. The inscription is candid about exchange, even when sermons are not. It shows the ledger under the prayer. Letters of remission and pardon show the gears. A man petitions. He lists his fault and his reason. A notary polishes both. A prince or bishop signs and collects a fee. The letter walks through town like a modest miracle. Records imply many endings came this way. Ink, not thunder. Printing arrives and adds volume. Indulgence forms with blanks. Notices with seals pre-engraved. Sermons that quote fee tables. Broadsides that turn a lane fight into a continence debate. Sources suggest speed made suspicion sensible. Rituals that once felt like care now look like industry. Proverbs and songs carry oral maps where paper is thin. The bell that bans rings twice. Shame walks long, mercy walks last. A child learns the route before he reads. An old woman quotes a line to explain why a neighbor still stands near the door. Oral sources are precise about mood, fuzzy about dates. We treat them as weather. What do we not hear? Women's voices, except as wife of, widow of. The poor, except as totals. Jews, heretics, and strangers mostly as objects of policy. Gaolers and beadles, except as function. The accused, except through verbs that cool. Pain listed as bread and water, rather than hunger and shame. Silence is not absence. It is what the system chose not to make legible. Bias is consistent. Offices justify themselves. Critics exaggerate. Families sanitize. Guilds protect their own. Princes rename bargains as peacemaking. Churches rename punishment as cure. The trick is triangulation. Court roll plus account plus sermon. Certificate plus inscription plus step, worn thin. When three agree, we trust the shadow. Watch for verbs that cool. Corrected. Edified. Pacified. They replace punished without changing the schedule. Note nouns that widen. Scandal. Peace. Unity. They justify reach. The lexicon is the spin. Learning it is learning the stagecraft. Numbers have accents. Reconciled, 25. Absent, 4. Fees remitted, 5. A dean calls it a good year for mercy. A magistrate calls it a good year for discipline. The same ink, 2 readings. Add a line, candles purchased, 12. And you can almost see the procession. Regional records quarrel in a polite way. One diocese forbids public penance, except for notorious crimes. Another uses it weekly as education. One city posts fees in ink. Another hides the chart and smiles. Sources suggest variation is a feature, not a flaw. Mechanisms adapt, motives repeat. We note the footnotes that matter. After 1,215, ordeals discouraged. After plague, leniencies extended, then retracted. During war, interdicts used as leverage, then bargained away. During reform, Fees standardized. Pardoners watched. Confession manuals revised. History walks like a procession. A step, a pause, a turn, a refrain. Caution lives in margins. A notary writes done with tears. A dean adds pauperibus remissa, remitted for the poor in a smaller hand. A parish book says no bells during frost, beside a reconciliation that would have frozen feet. These human notes keep us from turning a system into a monster. People tempered it, even when they could not remake it. We also admit what we cannot know. How a mother slept the night her child waited for baptism. What a penitent felt under cloth in July. Whether the Beatles' pen ever shook. Records imply is the honest stance. Later tradition claims is the warning label. We stand in the doorway and say, softly, enough to proceed. So, we proceed. With shards, with patterns, with verbs that carry disguises. The archive will not give us screams. It will give us schedules. It will give us receipts. It will give us a bell rope, worn smooth. Next, we look for conscience inside the machine. Priests who opened windows, clerks who misfiled to save tempers, guilds that fed instead of flaunted because the margins are where mercy kept its notes. Turn the page. The ink there is thinner. The truth there is warmer. Begin with a delay that looks like dust. A clerk turns a page slowly. He asks for the sand, not because the ink needs it, but because a temper does. The pause is small. It buys a night. Mercy lives in margins. Pauperibus remissa, remitted for the poor, written in a thinner hand than the fee table. A future registrar will copy the phrase without being told why. Habit becomes policy when ink repeats it often enough. A priest reads 3 names and stops at 2. He folds the strip, ill, he says, and lets the 3rd name sleep. Records imply the man was working, not ill. The fold bought a day softened a pride. The parish kept its face. Confessors use ladders hidden in books. Penitentials teach them to scale, shame down. Public for notorious, private for penitent. Ask once, do not pry. Assign what can be borne by the poor. Bread instead of linen. Loaves instead of routs. Mercy counted, but counted kindly. A chancellor misfiles on purpose. Continued to the octave becomes continued again until rumor cools. He calls it administration. It is courage written as neat postponement. No speeches, only dates. Thresholds make law kinder. Under interdict, the font is a border. A woman lifts a child at the porch. The priest steps to the sill, whispers the rite, and goes back to the dark. Manuals allowed it. In periculo, noli morari, in danger, do not delay. The seal can sleep. Breath cannot. Guilds act like umbrellas. A brother suspended from table eats anyway because the ward bought an extra loaf and said nothing. The ledger writes alms. The room writes gratitude. Shame is not starved, it is thinned. Parish women keep a second choir. They walk beside linen, so no one walks alone. They bring sandals and pretend the stones are sharper than they are. They know where the candle always gutters and shield the flame with a palm. None of this reaches a register. Kitchens remember. Notaries smuggle mercy into verbs, edified where punished would sting, reconciled where paraded would shame. Sometimes it is disguise. Sometimes it is a door that stays open. The word chooses how tomorrow feels. Appeals exist for justice, also for time. A proctor climbs the ladder, archdeacon, bishop, metropolitan, and writes letters that are really blankets. Consider, commute, remit. A month passes, anger cools. A reconciliation lands with less noise than it would have. Princes sometimes protect mercy by protecting trade. Charters limit interdicts that starve a ward for a noble's quarrel. Markets open at noon, even if bells do not. Graves receive bodies at sunset with 1 verse and a shovel. The motive is mixed, the outcome is not. Letters of remission bind remorse to ink. A man confesses a fight in a lane and the blow that ended it. A notary polishes grief into a narrative with signatures. A bishop signs and takes a fee. The letter walks through town like a small weather change. It is late for the dead. It is early for the next fight that does not happen. Reform hums like maintenance. Synods forbid selling absolution. Fee tables nailed to doors. Pardoners checked. Manuals warn confessors not to turn curiosity into cruelty. The wheel creaks. Someone oils it. Next decade, again. Discretion travels under old names. Discretio in the West. Oikonomia in the East. A bishop shortens a penance because a husband came home alive. A priest lifts a ban early because winter arrived early. A procession shortens because ice makes stone a knife. The note is small. The mercy is large. Shunning can be taught to blink. An innkeeper pours water for a banned neighbor and calls it custom. A miller grinds for a widow under minor ban and calls it accident. A vintner lets a cup warm cold hands and says, "Fire has no book." These are treasons against schedule. They keep towns from breaking. Pulpits can move heat to where it belongs. A preacher names a fee and its purpose, then names those exempt. He tells the rich to give in daylight and the poor to come after vespers. You cannot buy grace, he says, but oil must be paid for. Let the lamp do its work. Clarity cools faster than denial. Even inquisitors had valves. Manuals speak of admonitio, admonition before teeth, de levi rather than de vehementi. Grades of abjuration. A first fall treated like a bruise, a second like a fracture. Sources suggest practice varied. Records imply many files ended with ink, not flame. Across traditions, the hinge is the same. A Kadai uses tazir to warn, not whip. A consistory in Geneva replaces shunning with a visit and a prayer. A panchayat turns a fine into a feast and calls it repair. A bet din writes a narrow harem and sets its end before it begins. Different nouns, same rescue. Children learn mercy the way they learn shame, by watching hands. A beetle's pin hovers and does not fall. A clerk writes remitted when no one would have checked. A priest steps to a threshold at dusk. These gestures teach a grammar the fee table does not print. Mercy also fails. A schedule is softened and a mob is not. A fee is waived and envy calls it favoritism. A ban lifts and grief has already closed its fist. Conscience cannot time weather. It only holds umbrellas. We keep our skeptics close. Sources suggest discretion was uneven. Records imply that kindness was often local and thin in famine. Later tradition claims saints were scribes show neighbors. The cool phrasing is not coldness. It is guardrail. Look again at the drawer that pretends to be wood and is really a city's conscience. A libellus with a corner thumbed. A strip with 2 pinholes and a third that missed. A receipt stained by a coin that paid for oil in winter. A letter of remission folded around a line that says done with tears. These are not grand things. They are good. Mercy changes posture more than policy. It bends a route. It shaves a fee. On bad days, they miss, and the square grows colder than the page. Next comes the part no archive can shield us from. The echo. The feed. The policy that says community standards where a notice once said interdict. The appeal that is a form instead of a stare. The apology that is linen made of fonts. We carry our bells into glass. Listen. A tab blinks. A seal hovers as a click. A crowd warms its voice. The oldest question waits under a new light. What will we refuse to make theater? Start with a click, not a bell. A checkbox where an altar once stood. I agree. Terms as scripture. Policy as creed. The oath is not whispered now, it is scrolled. A rumor still begins the file. A post at midnight. A clip without the minute before. A caption that chooses a verb for you. It moves faster than a beetle can walk. It tags names. It recruits. Character witnesses by follower count. Compurgation by quote tweet. Screens keep a chancery in their pockets. Enforcement. Appeal. Community standards. Buttons for doors. Cues for corridors. A case number stands where a clerk once stood with ink on his fingers. The tone is clean. The rhythm is familiar. Proof changes clothes. A metric instead of a man. Reach. Engagement. Sentiment. A thread is an affidavit without oath. A screenshot is a relic with pixels. A stitched clip is a bandage already opened. Context. Later. The calendar is measured in hours, not octaves. Ordeals come back as models. Risk scores, heat maps, dashboards. An algorithm finds patterns and judges in a blur. 3 days later, a notice opens the bandage. Compliant. Not compliant. The adjectives are tidy. The stakes are not. The water is code. The iron is math. Bans scale like they always did. Warning, restriction, suspension, ban. Minor for the tolerated, major for the avoided. Limited visibility becomes a shadow interdict. Deplatforming is a personal excommunication with a porch made of feeds. The verbs cool, pain. The calendar does the teeth. Public penance wears fonts. Notes app apologies with margins like vestments. Numbered points. I have listened. I will learn. I will donate. Linen as paragraph. Candle as share. The root is a thread that ends in turn-off comments. The crowd still acts as choir in court. Comments move like chant. Emojis become banners. Hashtags carry processions through doors that once called themselves private. Amen is a heart. Shun is a mute. Participation sanctifies outcomes. The old lesson holds. Moderators hold the desk. Tickets open. Tickets triaged. Tickets closed. They write in a hand the screen chooses for them. They cool heat with macros. Thanks for your report. We've reviewed your appeal. They sand lines with, please be patient. They do not name tiers. They feel them. Appeals exist. Forms instead of stairs. A bot replies with a timeline. A human looks for context and finds silence that behaves like guilt. The best appeals land with a small, late mercy. Reinstated. The worst land with a phrase the archive has always loved. Final. Money sits in the wings, steady as stone. Ads and sponsors. Brand safety thresholds. Preferred lanes for trusted partners. It is not an indulgence. It behaves like one. Predictability in exchange for obedience to a rubric. Influence as a chantry with recurring payments. No miracles. Only margins. Hagiography glows in profiles. Thread of heroes. Saint of the algorithm. A helper becomes a model. A model becomes a merch line. Polemic burns in quote tweets. Grifter. Monster. The same nouns that widened reach in parchment days widen it now. Scandal justifies jurisdiction. Unity justifies speed. Peace justifies quiet bans. Confession schedules survive as calendars. We'll address this at 9 a.m. EST. Statement coming after internal review. Penance becomes timed withdrawal. 7 days off. 30 days off. A return post with a rebrand. The crowd counts like a clerk. Returned late or performed as ordered. Receipts imitate letters of remission. We've completed the training. We met with affected communities. We donated to X. Proof of reconciliation as carousel. The seal is a screenshot of a wire. The ribbon is a caption. Moving forward. The drawer is a pinned tweet. Evidence without air still tempts. Spectral proof returns as gut feel certainty. I just know. Look at the vibes. Notice how he blinked. Historians of the feed will argue later. Sources suggest many cases were rumor moving on rails. Records imply that logs were thin where outrage was thick. Caution remains a thermometer. Cooler words lead closer to truth. Some communities borrow old tools for better ends. Restorative circles. Private calls. Public harms addressed by private repair before public performance. A banner that says, welcome back after days counted on purpose. Rituals of return equal the ritual of removal. The room remembers how to heal without a crowd. Others remember only the stage. They turn review into content. They sell tickets to the bench. They treat apology as genre. They time the post to harvest the market. The ledger approves. The conscience does not. Triangulation still saves dignity. Statement plus behavior plus logs. What a person says, what a person does, what the archive can bear. Screenshots are not saints. Metrics are not witnesses. Memory is not law. We hold all three together, and the room grows safer. Clerks of conscience still exist. A moderator de-amplifies instead of deleting, and messages a human first. An editor refuses to headline a harm. A platform posts a full policy change instead of a press release. These are small hinges that move heavy doors. Bias travels as well as rumor. Offices justify themselves. Critics exaggerate. Families sanitize. Brands rename pressure as care. Influencers rename mobs as movements. The only cure we have had since wax cooled on ribbon is humility. Admit the partial view. Publish criteria. Let appeals breathe. We can still pick the furniture. Stage or workshop. Square or room with 2 chairs. If we must do theater, we can choose the role. Chorus that calls for evidence, not blood. Audience that refuses to clap off cue. If we do workshop, we can choose the tools. Questions before claims, logs before likes, a pause before share. The verbs still matter. Corrected is cheap. Repaired is work. Pacified is a number. Restored is a person. Pick the verbs that will look honest in a register someone will read in 30 years. Let the nouns stay narrow. Harm when proven. Witness when present. Claim when not. Children are still watching. They see which clips go loud and which doors open slowly. They count likes the way their grandparents counted candles. They will inherit our schedules. They will inherit our pauses. They will inherit the word we whisper at the end of a hard feed. Enough. The archive is growing. Not parchment, logs, moderation notes. Quiet tags, remitted, reversed, escalated. A researcher will find them and hear the hum of a choir. They will ask if we loved order more than people, if we confused a crowd for a conscience, if we called theater justice because it filled a dashboard. We are not compelled to repeat the worst scripts. Ordeals can be code audits, not dunks. Oaths can be transparent commitments with dates and names. Penance can be work that touches lives instead of walls of text. Bans can end with roots back that feel like mending, not rankings. The old lessons fit the new glass. Do not make God a clerk. Do not make a clerk a god. Do not tempt an algorithm with blood. Do not tempt a crowd with certainty you cannot weigh. Keep the seal in your hand a heartbeat longer than you think you need. Let heat think. Start small. Write rules like ladders, not pits. Put time between rumor and writ. Let an office count what can be counted and admit what cannot. Name fees, where they exist money, attention, status, and call them what they are. Choose mercy that leaves fingerprints policy can later learn. End as we began, with a sound, not a bell. A soft ping in a room gone quiet. A hand hovers over share. The seal is a click above wax that does not exist. The bench is a thread, already warm. What happens next will feel like law, if enough of us sing. What happens next will be justice only if enough of us pause.